Oh man, your day's been pretty busy. Mine got pretty busy because we're getting ready for a QA inspection, which is basically your cleanliness service and that
Yeah.
for one of our properties. So I did not see it up to par. So I had quite a list of things that I need my managers and them to do. So they're on that too for me. So
Well, having just traveled across the country back from New Jersey with my wife and the big dog, and staying in dog friendly but name brand hotels, I'm very glad that people do QA. I really am. You know, I
yeah.
really am, because there was one place we stayed that was great, and then there was another one that perhaps could use some additional QA checking. To use my wife was a little critical of the one place we stayed.
I believe it. Well, hey, I appreciate you coming out on the golden lining for me. Man, we've been friends now since right after COVID. We've pretty much
Gosh,
got
at
to know
least
each
that
other,
long. Seems longer,
right?
but
It seems longer. I feel like I've known you a lifetime, and like
yeah,
like the commonalities, whether it's age gap not, but like our commonalities, we sync up pretty well on
yes,
that concept.
yes.
So like I'm super excited. You've had you've had some fun stories. You have some fun things to talk about. So, and the guy I know today was not the same guy from the past. So, with that, before we get started, David, can you tell the audience kind of what you do?
Okay. I'm a trial lawyer, and I've been a trial lawyer since 1978. And I practiced here in Amarillo for my whole career. Um, and I've done cases in Amarillo and Lubbock and throughout the Panhandle, but then I've also done uh, cases in other places, Washington, D.C., Alabama, Mississippi, California, New Mexico. I've even been to trials in Iowa, New York, had a lot of cases all around the country. Spent a lot of my career doing work for the FDIC on failed banks, and got into a little niche in professional area of professional liability cases, director and officer liability cases, complex commercial fraud cases, attorney, appraiser, malpractice cases. Um, so I had a very broad experience in courts in outside of Amarillo, as well as in Amarillo and the Panhandle. And it's been wonderful. It's what I always wanted to do, was be a trial lawyer.
Hmm.
Uh, I don't know how much longer I've got to do it, but as long as the Lord wants me to keep doing it.
All right. So now us going back to you were born in Philly, right?
I was born in Philadelphia, 1953. That's where yeah,
1953,
that's
big
where
Eagles fan.
oh my, well, I started rooting for the Eagles about the time when they won the NFL championship in 1960. So I was about 7 years old when I first started rooting for the Eagles.
So when you were a teenager, if I was in high school with you and we were hanging out, would you be like the popular guy that everybody's trying to be around? Were you more on the quiet side? Kind of give me your personality and the person you were at that time.
Well, it depends on which year. Ninth grade, and largely 10th grade too. I was really kind of an outsider
Hmm.
kid. I didn't have a big band of friends at that time, and I think I had more people that hated me or disliked me than liked me. Uh, my parents thought it would be good for me for ninth grade to go to a special school in Philadelphia called Central High School, which is for advanced advanced placement students. and you had to take two public transportation buses so all the way across town to get there, and I just hated it from day one.
So what was the reason that what did they see in you that they wanted to push you
Uh,
up?
I didn't know what it was, and I still don't.
Mhm.
But apparently I had a good IQ, or people, were saying in the school, like somebody would say I heard you had a high IQ. I didn't know. No, my parents never talked about it. But I heard from the time I was a little boy that I was underachieving what I should be. I wasn't living up to my potential because I lacked self-control, and I had not good. They used to grade you for quote citizenship, and I was graded poorly on citizenship and self-control. so,
Okay.
so it was an ongoing problem from the time I was in. Honestly, from the time I was in third grade. Um, so all through it was a K through 8 school that I was in, and then I left that place and went to this special school, and I hated it there, and I was cutting school. And 10th grade I went back to the neighborhood school, but because I had been at that other school, I was an outcast. And I did make some friends that year, but I also had a lot of really bad experiences with people, really being hostile to me.
Hmm.
And I didn't like, I mean, I just was not a happy kid in ninth and 10th grade. Um, 11th grade, I kind of hit my stride.
But sorry
Yeah,
to go
yeah.
back. Was the curriculum boring? Was it was there some kind of like frustration you had with whatever, or were you just part of a crowd of people that kind of directed you in a different direction?
Um, well, in ninth grade, because I had gone outside the neighborhood school, I was really like a pariah in the neighborhood because I wasn't going to the neighborhood school. All right.
Hmm.
So people really had it out for me. And a lot of people, especially older guys like a year or two ahead of me, that, just detested me and made a big deal out of it that I wasn't in the neighborhood school. And so I started hanging out with kids from another neighborhood
Hmm.
across there was this big street, it was a 12-lane road right in our kind of separate our neighborhood from a neighborhood called Summerdale. So I started going over to Summerdale and hanging out with some really bad kids over there. Most of whom were either enrolled in Catholic schools or supposedly enrolled in Catholic schools, and they were doing a lot of things. Now, I didn't do all these things that they were doing. I mean, I wasn't using drugs. I was drinking some, but not a whole lot.
Yeah.
This is 14. Um, but some of them were stealing cars. There were friends. I had friends that were involved in that. I started dating a girl that was 2 or 3 years older than me, and we didn't do anything bad. I mean, we kissed. I mean, that was about it. I mean, I wasn't doing things that were really affirmatively awful, but I was just kind of lost. I was just really lost.
People within your community of your neighborhood weren't accepting you because you weren't allowed to, or you weren't put into the school same district as your friend circle. So they threw you out based off of not going to school in your neighborhood.
Right. It'd be like in Amarillo if you went to, I mean, if you lived in Amarillo High District, but you were over at Tascosa or PD.
Hmm.
And, you'd be an outcast really because you weren't socially connected to anybody else. It was hard for me. I was, I was active in the Boy Scouts. But at that time I was basically the scoutmaster got mad at me because I missed some meetings, and he started screaming at me for missing meetings. And I was missing meetings because I was trying to meet girls. I was going to dances and things where I might meet a girl, and I would meet girls, but they were always like from some other neighborhood or just hard, I mean, it wasn't developing anything, but I was just meeting with, meeting girls and this kind of thing. And so I liked doing that better than the Boy Scout meetings. So he got mad at me, yelled at me, and he basically kicked me out of the troop. So I stopped coming. And I was a life scout at the time. I wasn't far from making Eagle, but I stopped because I did I was getting yelled at enough at school and at home. I didn't need to be yelled at Boy Scouts too.
So then 11th grade, you said that's where your kind of outlook and just kind of motivation changed over. So
I got sports were a salvation for me at that point. Okay. I had wandered away from being any kind of even halfway serious Christian when I was like 13.
Yeah.
And I was just, doing whatever I wanted to do, whatever pleased me at the time. Somewhere in there, I started smoking marijuana. I started drinking more heavily. But I became popular because I was good at sports, at basketball specifically. And I, played. That's all I still wanted to do at that point because it was kind of like my safe place. If I was on a basketball court, either in the schoolyard or, over at the school in the gym, I was liked.
Yeah.
I had friends. Wasn't looked down upon or hated, affirmatively hated. So
you found your spot, kind of where you belong.
Yeah. So I just, I if you had asked me at the time, I wouldn't have told you this because I wasn't fully conscious of what I was doing. I was just kind of going with the flow.
Yeah.
But I was playing, including the schools game during basketball season. I was playing at least 5 games a week. And I was playing in an industrial league on Wednesday night with grown-ups. I was playing in a church league 2 nights a week. I was playing, and then sometimes on Saturdays. And then I was playing in the public league, which was probably, there's nothing that compares to it around here, but the public league was turning out professional athletes. I was playing with great basketball players on Tuesdays and Thursdays all over the city. And so it was, but it was what I enjoyed it. Okay. Yeah. And it was something I felt good about doing. And I started to adjust. Like I started to be more accepted because I was back in the school and I was meeting people and, you start to develop some network of friends. So 11th grade was a lot better. And I got my first real girlfriend when I was in 11th grade. And we thought we were like madly in love and all this stuff. But that helped too, I finally had a girlfriend that was not like for 3 weeks,
Yeah. So, okay, you become a popular athlete in the 11th grade. Moving forward, you found your spot with your group of friends. So in that group of friends, was it norm to do marijuana and drink, or was it just like, was that another coping mechanism for something else outside?
It was, I'll tell you what, it's a crazy thing because it does sound so nuts, but I never even heard of drugs growing up. I never heard of them. But along about, I want to say 1967, 1968, there were some older guys in the neighborhood who were athletes who came back from college for a break. I don't know if it was Christmas break, spring break, whatever break. and they had started using drugs. Okay. And they started telling everybody that's the thing, and people, all of a sudden, people all over the neighborhood were using marijuana and even other things. It just became extremely popular in the high school, and people were, doing this. And of course, drinking was already, it was an Italian and Irish neighborhood. I mean, Friday and Saturday nights, binge drinking, and sometimes even during the week. So I got off on a lot of bad stuff that way. I was doing what I had to do to get by in school, but I wasn't. The only classes that I really loved, were history and English.
Yeah.
Where I really loved what I was doing and enjoyed it, and was striving to get a good grade. Everywhere else, I was just trying to survive. And look, sometimes I would still get a good grade, because I like math. I always had a little thing, I always had an aptitude so that I could do math.
Something unique you just said,
Yeah.
that's pertaining to today's world.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of going a little tangent on it.
No, you're fine.
But you know how you said these two guys came from college, which means that everybody looked up and said, wow, these guys are from college. Like, they've seen things outside of our city.
I mean, they'd gone to college on athletic scholarships.
And so they made it, right? And
Yeah.
so, like, you see that. And so, like, isn't it interesting, like, in correlation to today's world that we live in, and how somebody who's influential, somebody who has a following, somebody you admire, whether they're an athlete or they're people on social media or whatnot, and how their outlook on life and what they throw and give perception of is immediately inhaled by the younger crowd or even older crowd, just by seeing it, because they see that as like, that's how you make it, or that's how you see, like, you know what, life is unfair because of X, or hey, you know what, they only got it because of this. And so sorry, you're talking from in the 60s or 70s?
Late 60s now.
Late 60s we're in, right? So in the late 60s, that was the case. Today, with social media and everything, like, how much has really changed, other than like now how much you can inhale based off of our phones and just social media as a whole?
Yeah, you can be peer pressured now by people you don't even know, right? In those days, the peer pressure was coming from people you had gone to school with, in many cases, since you were a kindergartner, and they might have been a year or two ahead of you. I mean, the one guy I'm talking about, he was offered a contract with the Cincinnati Reds. So he's like one of the high status sports guys in the neighborhood, and he's coming back and saying, this is all good. This is what you should be doing. And then when I got the senior year, I went to work part-time, when I wasn't playing ball, for this little store. It's kind of like Toot and Totem, but it had more stuff. Like, it had their own deli, and they had more different varieties of food in there, but it was still it wasn't a full-size supermarket, or even, I guess it would have been comparable to the corner grocery stores that they used to have in Philadelphia, but it was not a corner. It was on a street. It was a standalone building. But I went to work there. And this lady that worked there, who I really grew to like, and I can't think of her name right now, but she told me she was dating Richie Ashburn. Well, Richie Ashburn's a Hall of Fame baseball player for the Phillies, a guy who I had admired and loved since I was, little guy. My dad obviously loved him. He was one of the Phillies announcers at that point, and just a highly, and she's smoking pot all the time. And she's like 40 something. And so, she used to come back into the walk-in refrigerator deal with you and smoke pot with you. And, I was like, well, crap, if Richie Ashburn's smoking pot, it must be okay. Right.
Yeah.
And so that meant a lot to me. And look, it's not, I'm not saying any of this is logical or good. I'm just telling you what happened.
No, but this is a learning lesson for other people
Yeah.
that, like just because you're seeing maybe somebody that's an idol to you or something that's from your area that, has came out and got to do something different from what people within your neighborhood get to do, doesn't mean necessarily you need to follow within
Yeah.
that culture or
You don't.
that thought process.
I so wish that I had my high school years back and didn't do any of that. Didn't drink, didn't smoke, just concentrated on sports and academics. And I think I would have been such a more positive influence on the people around me, and I would have done so much better at everything, at school, at basketball, at football. Um, I mean, I don't look like much like a football player, but I was a pretty good football player at one time. And when players were smaller, I mean, you didn't play against guys that were 280 or something, really very, or if you did, they were so slow, you just ran around them like they weren't even there, but they couldn't even get out of their stance, right?
Yeah.
There weren't guys that were like in shape and 280 pounds,
Oh,
like that guy in the game yesterday that ran Makuba down.
yeah.
I think, that is, I mean, you're right on it. That's the problem is you are wasting your life, but nobody's telling you that nobody that you look to as an authority, okay?
Hmm.
And by the time you're an 11th and 12th grader, the authorities in your life are other kids. Maybe your coaches, maybe to some degree there's somebody else, but for the most part, there's a distance between you and all those adults. But if the guys that are hanging out on the corner, if they're pulling in the wrong direction, I went with it, and it was a big mistake. And I kind of led my girlfriend down that primrose path. I don't know whatever happened to her, but I think she turned out okay eventually. But it was it's just a bad thing. So that's what happened.
But let's say you didn't experience those things. Like based off your breakdown, one, you were looking for where you belong.
Right.
And the place you belong, you couldn't go to because you weren't within that school, within your neighborhood. So then you ended up in another neighborhood.
Right.
So every place you went, there was a pushback or some malicious kind of retaliation towards you in every facet. Now you get to 11th grade, you're a stud athlete, you know, maybe even more looks came in and just overall everything. And with that, it was a newfound feeling that you never experienced. And because now you are an athlete and the guy from your neighborhood who's a all-star stud that got a a scholarship for sports comes in and tells you, hey, XYZ is the way to go. Basically, if you want to be like me, and it feels so good to be where you are, and how much you recognize and how much people adore you at that moment, that you don't know the other way because you knew what it felt like being on the outside. And being on the outside was awful because you always felt behind, and no matter where you
It's
played.
it was really hard to be on the outside. It was really hard. And I mean, I'd be lying to you if I would say, oh, it would have been easy to be on the outside. It was really hard. There was a cost. I mean, people were really mean. I mean, I had so many fistfights when I was in ninth grade. I had like probably more fistfights when I was in ninth grade than I had all the rest of my life put together. And like I remember the first day of school at Central, I didn't even get to the school. A guy started a fight with me on the bus stop. Okay. and I am literally wailing. We're literally wailing away each other. I can't even remember what it was about at the bus stop, at one of the bus stops, And then we got on the bus, I guess, because we ended up at the school. But it was just nuts. And then there were older guys who were, high, uh, held in very high esteem in the neighborhood. Okay. Athletic guys who were, president of the senior class and all this stuff. And they were just so mean to me. I mean, like, I remember on one of the scout trips, one of those guys forced me out. This was in the middle of the winter on a log that had fallen down over the Pennypack Creek, which if it was in Amarillo, it'd be called a river. Okay. Yeah. Philadelphia got real giant rivers. So what looks like what we call a river here was a creek, but it was a significant thing. He took that log and shook it until I fell into the water in the middle of the winter. Yeah. There were just people. I mean, there are things, just atrocious stuff that older guys did to me when I was a younger guy. I mean, just like I wouldn't even talk about them.
So this is why I feel like it's logical for the decisions you made, and illogical, in a mindset, maybe it may be considered illogical because, knowledge and what you have accomplished and went through in life. But at that moment, it makes sense because you just stated how far down that hole you really went and how much you really endured. How much did your family know?
Well, this is a really strange story, but it's true. And I want to tell you, and I want to preface it with my parents, in my eyes, are two great saints who lived out the gospel in the way they raised me and my brother and sister. But they had a terrible life story. Okay. My father was from an incredibly poor family where his parents were so poor, they basically farmed out his sister. It was the two of them, farmed out his sister to these other people because they couldn't afford to take care of her. So they let somebody else take her, Aunt Ruth. And then my dad, went through the Depression. He told me he's working for a dime an hour as a printer's devil, which is like you're just covered with ink every day. He worked his way up, and my mother was from a poor family too, but not as poor as my dad's family. I mean, I had one of my great uncles was a bootlegger, and he got shot and was killed, and my grandfather had to go identify him. But they were very poor. They went to work for a factory in the neighborhoods called SKF, and my mom was just like a secretary or something, but that's where they met. So they were both working there, and they got married, like 1939. My dad got on with Ford Motor Company. I don't know if it was right after the war, late in the war. And he rose up in Ford Motor Company. He was like a shooting star. And my parents moved from Philly and moved into a really nice suburb in Delaware called Claymont. And my dad was so far up in Ford, he was the district truck sales manager for the whole Philadelphia area. And Lee Iacocca, I don't know if you know who that is, but he basically eventually ran Ford, and then he ran Chrysler and American Motors at some point. And I mean, he's a famous guy. He would pick my dad up to go to work. And my dad was on first name basis with this guy. So he was doing great. In 1950, my dad had a terrible attack of was believed to be something called Guillain-Barré syndrome, completely paralyzed. They later said, well, maybe it was multiple sclerosis, but in those days, they didn't know. They didn't know what they were doing with it. And it was a thing that put him completely out of commission for like 9 months or something. And slowly he recovered enough to go back to work, but not anything like what he had. Okay. He lost out at Ford. He ended up working for Nabisco, had a job filling vending machines, like filling vending, taking the coins out of them. And at night he worked at a car lot selling cars off used cars off the lot. And my mom worked as a secretary. So somewhere in there, but that's probably later in the 50s. Somewhere in there, they got divorced in the early 50s. The two of them got divorced, and my brother and sister were older. They were 1943, 1945. So my mom started seeing the next door neighbor. Okay, Frank. I won't talk too much about Frank, but anyway, I'm the product of that. Okay. My dad found out that Frank and mom had gotten mom pregnant. Frank wouldn't marry mom because he was married to his cousin. There's no bullshit. This is all true. Okay. So mom's living with her sister and my uncle Stan. And with the kids, and daddy comes back and says, let's get remarried, and we'll get this all straightened out, and I'll he'll be, when he was born, we'll be married, so he'll be my son. And that's what happened. So the only father I ever knew was my dad. So he came back, and basically, we just struggled. Daddy would have a job, then he'd lose his job, and the hard times would hit, and it was crazy. We lived in an apartment for a long time, and then we finally got a house, and we kind of got where we were somewhat respectable, But the point is, my parents were much older than they were, for the people in those days. When I was 14, my dad was 53, so way older than most of my classmates. And my dad loved me, and he helped coach my basketball team. He was kind of watching over me in Boy Scouts and stuff. But there was such a distance between us that I just stopped. I stopped listening to him. I shouldn't have, but I did. And that was bad. And my mom got very frustrated with me, because I was always getting in trouble. And she would take the brunt, from the teachers and whoever was complaining.
Yeah.
Daddy was more remote from that. I mean, he didn't, what was he going to do? So it just, my parents tried very hard to do the right thing by me. And I didn't realize how good they were until I was later, till later in life, till I was in my 20s. But I made life hard for them. That is part of the problem, because I think if, I needed somebody to get me straightened out. And I didn't find that person, or at least I ran away from them.
Yeah. Meaning one, the area you were in, two, the difficulty, I talk about this with so many people, the opportunities I get with my son and my daughter are so vastly different than what my parents got with me. Now they may regret it, whatnot, but I appreciate everything, because when you're in survival mode, your mind can only think of, how do I make sure, your kids are fed? Where do you sleep? What are you going to do about this? How are we going to afford that? When you're going through that kind of hard pressure and stress and the constant pressure of it, how you want to give love, you want to be there, and your father sounded like he was, because he, trying to coach your teams and whatnot while still struggling with the rest of it. it's one of those things you go, even if they were to like, hey, I wish I could have been there for that, but you have to respect because there's they still kept the home warm. There's still food. You still had a bed or somewhere to sleep, and you still got love.
That's
Period.
it.
Point blank.
That's it. That's why I say that they were great parents. Even though some people would say, and of course they were fighting amongst themselves because I mean that like their marriage was now entirely based on the kids.
Yeah.
Well, you can have a marriage, and I think God wants you to stay in a marriage like that, but they were both making some great sacrifices to do that. And I think both of them had a hard time trying to reconcile with one another, but they always loved the three of us. I think, with all they had. I mean, I think my parents basically like they worked, they lived to take care of their kids. That was the goal,
Hmm.
you know?
So then, now you're telling me in your high school or late high school years, you were popular. You were into alcohol and um, marijuana and things of that nature at that time. So, were your grades good then?
My grades were a kind of a mixed bag. I ended up graduating like, the class was, we started out, to give you an idea of that school and that neighborhood, we started out with 1,000 kids in 10th grade there. All right. When I went over there to Frankfurt High School in 10th grade. And the principal got up the first day. He said, there's 1,000 of you out there in the assembly. And he said, when we're here at graduation, a third of you will be gone. So he's saying like, you're all going to be, you're going to be dropping out. And of course, people started dropping out like flies.
Is it because he said it?
No, that's just that was their experience. In that neighborhood, so many kids went to work. And of course, at that point, there were still factories in that area where you could make money. When you were 16 years old, you could make some money working piecework at Plum Tool, for instance, and you could make some really good money. Or people would go in the military. I mean, lots of guys left the school and went to the military. And other jobs. I mean, there were other jobs around, and so people left when they were 16 or 17 and departed. And that was boys and girls. So when we got to graduation, it was 571 of us. All right. So I was like 58th or 59th in my class, which was, that's the top 10% or so, or top 15%. But I wasn't pushing it. The only classes I really pushed in, like I told you, were
History and English.
And chemistry. I really loved chemistry. I mean, I was like totally into chemistry. I made my own homemade lab in my parents' basement and did all kinds of crazy stuff. If I'd done it today, I'd been arrested. But all the crazy stuff I was doing down there, but it wasn't malicious. I just was interested. Some of it was a little malicious because we'd make these little fireworks type things, that we thought was funny, to put on somebody's doorstep and ring the doorbell, They come to the door and it would blow up. But I think that I think that I did get a decent education there. I made it into Penn State at University Park at main campus because of my SAT scores.
So that's how you got into college, really. The SAT score was, because that was going to be my next question. Because if you were not performing up to par, it has to be something to get you into college.
Yeah, and my SAT score carried me completely. It was like.
Do you recall what it was?
Well, this is another great story. Okay, so the first time I took the SAT, it wasn't for me. Okay, so I had a teammate on the basketball team. His father had gone to Penn, all right, the University of Pennsylvania. He was a screw off as a student. I mean, I don't think Steve McCluskey, and he didn't really he didn't really have much hope, and he was so worried that he wasn't going to get into Penn. And so, we'd been buddies for a long time, and he was somebody, that I really connected with. So he said, Dave, could you take the SAT for me? Because he knew I was better at school than him. I said, sure, man, it's okay. I didn't know the consequence. I'm just a stupid kid, right?
Yeah.
So, I just go down. In those days, there was no security whatsoever. I mean, there was probably a lot of people that did that. I don't know. I mean, I never talked to anybody else about it. But so I got a 1309 for Steve. And the things come out. And McCluskey, people are like, what? How is that possible? How is it possible that McCluskey got a 1309? And McCluskey apparently confided with a couple of guys on the sports teams. And then it got back to one of the coaches. And the coach, and I think it was Coach Angelo, I was in his office for something. And he said, Mullin, I heard you got a pretty good score on the SAT. And of course, that was before I'd taken it for myself. So I was like, and anyway, so I did take it myself, and I only got a 1275. But what happened when I took it myself, the night before, I went to this coffee house at a church, and that was it was a, fairly nice little thing. You'd go, it was dark, they were playing rock and roll music, you danced a little bit. And I had planned to go home at a decent hour that night. Well, I get outside, and there's these three guys, at least I think it was three guys, yeah, from Mary's neighborhood, these just like utter hoodlums. And they said, hey, are you Johnny Lake? Now, Johnny Lake was my teammate on the football team, and we were buddies, and there was some resemblance, okay? But Johnny was way more of a gang guy than I was, like a serious, where, you did a lot of fighting in the gang, I was more of I'm hanging on the street corner, and once in a while there'd be a fight, but it wasn't like anything where we were searching fights out. Like was, okay? So apparently he must have beaten somebody up from Summerdale, and they said, and I said, no, I'm not Johnny Lake. And they go, they kept pushing me and said, you're lying. So all of a sudden I found myself in a fist fight, and the guy that was with me, and he said, I just talked to him on the phone this summer. First time I talked to him in like 5 years, and he's going blind. Lives out in California now. Harry Swift. Harry runs away. It was like in Brer Rabbit, the possum, like laying there dead. And I don't blame him. Harry did. He was not much of a fighter anyway. They'd have just whooped his ass. Anyway, so I started hitting them, or one of them. I started going after Timmy Ryan, who was the toughest of the three, a little bit, and then all three of them came at me, and I don't know exactly what happened after that, except I think I hit the ground, and I popped back up and started running, because I guess I was just like, what am I going to do? This was outside of a church too. I'm getting my head kicked in. And so I run, and of course I know my way. Since they're out of their neighborhood, I'm in my neighborhood now. I know the shortcuts. So I cut through the Joey Kiss's yard, and there's like this big hedgy thing, and you could kind of run back in there. You can't see it. And I ran back in there, and I kept running. And damn, if I didn't fall down. I fell down while I was running, and my leg was bleeding from the top of my knee all the way down to my ankle. It was I ripped off the skin. So now I I figure, well, geez, I got to go home because I got the SAT tomorrow. So I go home. Well, I didn't want to tell my mother what happened. This would be like, well, you know, she would immediately assume I was doing something wrong,
Yeah.
and which would most cases would have been true, but not this instance because it really wasn't me. So I went to the thing the next morning. I had to go out to Penn's campus. That's where they were giving the SAT, and I couldn't get the bleeding stopped. I couldn't get it to stop bleeding. So the whole time I'm taking a test, I got all this blood coming out. It was so silly. I mean, I was like, oh gosh, well, I couldn't go up to the proctor and say, look, can you give me a little extra time here? I got blood all over me. Anyway, I got a 1275 when I took it from myself. And that was
And
enough to get me into
the
Penn
12,
State. So
so
I guess I regressed because of the distraction. So but that was a good thing for me because Penn State was really good for me. It was good for me.
what brought out the good?
Well, okay. So the summer before college,
Hmm.
um, I was just like partying like crazy. I had a job down in Ocean City as I had the summer before. And I mean, I was just going wild down there, just, having a ball. Well, one night I was with a friend from the basketball team, Doug Logan, and we had a couple 6-packs of beer. And we're walking along the street, and all of a sudden a cop yells at us. And like, I think he was in his car, but he was parked. So he just jumped right out and got us and nabbed us, which wouldn't have been all that bad because, underage beer, right? I mean, we weren't, we were violating the law, but it was a minor infraction. So we get down to the police station.
Hmm.
And of course, I'm just horrified, right? What's going to happen now? So we get down to the police station, and the guy wants to look at my wallet, like go through all my stuff. And so I had my wallet there and I just gave it to him. And I was like, there's nothing. It was probably like $2 in there. Right? Well, in there, remember the guy, the Cincinnati Reds, the college guy? All right. I had seen him sometime in the last 3 weeks. He'd given me what they used to call a little roach. It was a
Oh,
tiny little end of a
yeah.
marijuana cigarette, and it was in my wallet. So it was like a fingernail size. And so then they said, okay, we're booking you for possession of marijuana too. They call my parents who had to drive down from Philadelphia. I got sick to my stomach and started throwing up, I think. It was just awful. And my parents got me out. And of course, I had to go back to Philadelphia. And I had really hurt my parents. I mean, I really had hurt them. And I had to go before a judge later in the summer. And the guy said to me, well, what do you think I should do with your case? That's how the judge started. Like, what do you want me to do? And I said, well, just do whatever the law says you should do. That's what I said. That was a really bad answer.
Yeah.
I was obviously didn't know what the heck I was doing. And he said, okay. So he pulled out this law book and he starts reading me what the law requires. And it's just like awful, all this awful crap. And I said, well, I think you should be lenient in my case. Anyway, so he just made it like a pretrial diversion type thing, like you would do here in Texas. But I mean, my parents were thoroughly humiliated. I felt awful what I had done, that I'd really been mean to my parents, and it was just terrible. Anyway, so I got back to Philadelphia, and it was like a month till I had to go to college. And when I got up to Penn State, I said to myself, it was within a few weeks, first few weeks, I said, you know something? This is real. This is real. This is going to determine, where I'm going to end up in life. And I got to get serious. And I didn't stop partying, and I certainly didn't have any kind of religious experience at that point.
Okay, pause it.